The Manhattan humiliation, the crystal chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel blurred as security gripped my upper arms. "Elena, please don't make this more difficult than it already is," my father, Julian Vance, whispered, refusing to look me in the eye. He stood there in a $10,000 tuxedo, looking like the king of Manhattan real estate, but he was nothing more than a puppet. Beside him stood Victoria, his wife of 3 years, wearing my mother's vintage emerald necklace, a piece she'd practically stolen from my jewelry box. "This is my mother's building, Dad," I screamed, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "She designed it. You can't sell it to fund Victoria's failing fashion line." Victoria stepped forward, a glass of vintage champagne in her hand. She leaned into the microphone, her smile like a razor blade. "Elena, darling, your mother has been gone for 15 years. You're just a bitter girl living in the past. You have no money, no shares, and clearly no class. Security, remove this uninvited guest immediately." The elite of New York watched in silence. No one stood up for me, not even my father. I was dragged out of the gala and tossed onto the rain-slicked sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. As the heavy brass doors slammed shut, I looked at my reflection in a puddle. I was broke, humiliated, and discarded. But Victoria made one mistake. She thought I was weak because I was quiet. She forgot that I was my mother's daughter, and my mother didn't just build skyscrapers, she built traps for people like them. I stood up, wiped the rain from my face, and made a vow. I would let them keep the party. I was going for the empire, the hidden blueprints. I spent that night in my tiny, drafty studio in Brooklyn, surrounded by the only things I had left, my mother's old architectural tubes. Everyone thought Julian Vance owned the Vance Empire, but my mother, Clara, was the true genius. She was the one who turned a small family firm into a billion-dollar legacy, while searching through a false bottom in her old drafting table. I found it, a leather-bound file labelled Project Phoenix. My hands shook as I read the legal documents. My mother had predicted Julian's weakness long ago. She knew he was a man who led with his heart and his ego, rather than his head. The documents revealed a silent trust. The 5 most valuable properties in New York, the ones Julian was currently using as collateral for his massive lifestyle loans, weren't actually his to sell. My mother had placed them in a trust that would automatically trigger and transfer 51% ownership to me the moment Julian attempted to liquidate the glass heirloom, the building he had just announced he was selling at the gala. Julian and Victoria were currently living on borrowed time and borrowed money. They had taken out over $200 million in private loans to fund Victoria's extravagant lifestyle, assuming the sale of the glass heirloom would cover the debt. They were drowning, and they didn't even know the tide was coming in. I called Mr. Sterling, a man who had been my mother's most trusted attorney before Julian fired him. "Sterling," I said, my voice cold and steady. "It's time to activate the Phoenix. I want every debt, every loan, and every mortgage Julian Vance has ever signed. I want to buy them all." The ghost investor. For the next 6 months I became a ghost, while Victoria and her daughter Cassandra posted photos on Instagram of their private jets and $50,000 Birkin bags, mocking my disappearance in their captions. I was working 16 hours a day in a windowless office. Using the initial capital from my mother's hidden trust, I founded Ethelgard Holdings. To the world, Ethelgard was a mysterious European investment group. In reality, it was just me and Sterling. We didn't buy stocks, we bought Julian's failures. Every time Julian's company missed a contractor payment or a tax deadline, Ethelgard was there to snap up the debt. I found out Victoria was siphoning money, millions of it, into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, preparing to leave Julian the moment the money ran out. She didn't love him. She was harvesting him. I watched through my screen as Julian grew thinner, his face aging a decade in months. He was panicking. The banks were closing in, and his only hope was the final sale of the glass heirloom building to a Saudi investment group. He thought that sale would save his life. He didn't realize I was the one who had spent the last 24 weeks systematically blocking every other exit. I waited until the very last day, the day of the final signing. I bought a new suit tailored to perfection. It wasn't the midnight navy of a victim. It was the charcoal grey of a predator. I put on my mother's Mikimoto pearls, the ones Victoria hadn't found, and hailed a cab to the Vance building. It was time to show them exactly what nothing looks like. The boardroom coup. The boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and desperation. Julian sat at the head of the table, his hands trembling as he reached for a gold fountain pen. Victoria was beside him, already looking at real estate in Saint-Tropez on her phone. Cassandra was recording the historic moment for her followers. "Just sign here." "Just sign here, Julian," the Saudi representative said. "Stop," I said, pushing the heavy oak doors open. The room went silent. Julian's pen hit the floor. Victoria sneered. "Security. I thought we dealt with this trash months ago." "Security won't be coming, Victoria," I said, tossing a thick stack of documents onto the table, mainly because I fired the firm that provides them 20 minutes ago, along with the cleaning crew, the catering staff, and your personal driver. "What are you talking about?" Julian gasped, his voice cracking. "Dad, look at the papers," I said. "Ethelgard Holdings doesn't just own your debt anymore. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I exercised the Project Phoenix clause in Mom's trust. Because you attempted to sell the heirloom, 51% of this company automatically reverted to me, and since I also happen to own the $300 million in personal loans you used to fund Victoria's fashion career, I am now your primary creditor." I leaned over the table, looking directly at Victoria. Her face turned a sickly shade of grey. "The glass heirloom isn't for sale, but this building? Vance HQ? It is, and since the company is technically insolvent, I'm calling in the loans, effective immediately." "You can't do this," Cassandra shrieked, her phone still recording. "I can," I replied. "I own the chair you're sitting on, Cassandra. I own the shoes on your feet. And by the end of the day, I'll own the house you sleep in. You wanted me out of your world? Fine. I just decided to buy it instead. The fallout. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in structural collapse. Victoria tried to play the victim, crying to the press about filial ingratitude, but I was ready. I released the forensic audit Sterling and I had spent months preparing. The headlines didn't talk about a disobedient daughter. They talked about Victoria's $12 million embezzlement scheme. They talked about the offshore accounts and the secret lover she'd been funding with Julian's retirement money. The socialites who had watched me get kicked out of the gala were suddenly blowing up my phone, inviting me to dinners I would never attend. Victoria was served with divorce papers and a criminal summons in the lobby of the Vance building. I watched from the balcony as she was forced to hand over the keys to the Bentley. Cassandra stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by designer suitcases, realizing that her followers didn't care about a girl who couldn't afford a ring light. I walked into Julian's office, my office now. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty boxes. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the man he used to be, before the greed and the ego took over. "She was going to leave me," he whispered, holding the printouts of Victoria's bank transfers. "She never loved me at all, did she?" "She loved the empire Mom built," I said, sitting across from him. "And you gave it to her on a silver platter. What are you going to do with me?" he asked. I looked at the blueprints on the wall. "I'm not Victoria. I'm not going to leave you in the street. I've bought back the old house in Westchester, the one Mom loved. You can live there. I'll provide you with a modest monthly allowance, but you will never step foot in this boardroom again. You lost the right to lead when you stopped protecting the foundation." The broken socialite. 6 months later, New York had a new queen. I didn't spend my time at galas or fashion shows. I spent it in hard hats, visiting the construction sites Victoria had neglected. I turned the failing fashion warehouses into low-income housing and community centres. One afternoon, I was walking into a boutique coffee shop in Soho when I saw a woman scrubbing the windows. She was wearing a faded uniform and looked exhausted. It was Cassandra. She froze when she saw me. The girl who used to spend $10,000 in a single afternoon was now working for minimum wage. Her friends had vanished the moment her credit cards were declined. "Eleanor," she rasped, her voice devoid of its usual sting. "Cassandra," I replied. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel the need to mock her. I just felt nothing. The revenge was complete, and it was colder than I expected. "My mother is in a state-appointed apartment in Jersey," Cassandra said, her eyes filling with tears. "She spends all day calling lawyers who won't pick up. We have nothing." "You have exactly what you earned," I said quietly. "You spent 20 years building a life out of glass and ego. Glass breaks, Cassandra. My mother built with steel and heart. That's why I'm still standing, and you're cleaning the windows of a building I happen to own." I pulled a $100 bill from my pocket and placed it in the tip jar. "Keep working. It builds character, something you never had the budget for." I walked away, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. I had spent so long focused on the destruction of my enemies that I had almost forgotten to build something for myself. I realized then that the best part of the revenge wasn't the look on their faces when they lost everything. It was the fact that I no longer cared what they thought of me. The Clara Vance Foundation. I officially rebranded the company to Clara Vance & Co. My mother's name was back where it belonged, at the top of the skyline. I established a foundation specifically for young women in architecture and business who had been disinherited or marginalized. I found a letter my mother had written to me, hidden in the back of the trust files. "Elena," it read, "a building is only as strong as its deepest pillar. If you ever find yourself in the dark, remember that I didn't just leave you money, I left you the blueprints of your own strength. Don't just protect what I built, improve it." I took those words to heart. I began the restoration of the glass heirloom building, not as a luxury mall for the elite, but as a public library and tech hub. I wanted the people of New York to have a place that felt like home, regardless of the balance in their bank accounts. My father, Julian, visited me at the grand opening. He looked healthier, his eyes clear for the first time in a decade. He lived a quiet life now, gardening and reading in the house Westchester. "Your mother would be so proud, Elena," he said, looking up at the glass spire. "You didn't just save the company, you saved me from myself." I squeezed his hand. "I did it for her, Dad, but I also did it for me." As the ribbon was cut and thousands of people flooded into the building, I felt a sense of peace. I was no longer the girl on the rainy sidewalk. I was the architect of my own destiny. The Vance legacy was no longer a story of greed and betrayal. It was a story of resilience. I had taken the ruins of my family and turned them into a monument of grace. The final foundation, the story of Elena Vance, became a legend in the New York business world. It was taught in universities as a case study in corporate strategy, but to me, it was just the story of a daughter who refused to be erased. Victoria eventually served 2 years for financial fraud. When she was released, she tried to write a tell-all book, but no publisher would take it. She had become a ghost in a city that only respects winners. Cassandra stayed in retail, eventually becoming a manager, finally learning the value of a dollar she actually earned. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, overlooking the city that had once tried to spit me out. The Manhattan skyline was glowing in the twilight. I looked at the glass heirloom, its lights shimmering like a beacon. I realized that revenge is a powerful fuel, but it's a terrible foundation. You can use it to start the engine, but you can't use it to keep the building standing. I had moved past the anger. I had moved past the need to prove Julian or Victoria wrong. I pulled out my phone and deleted the last of the old photos from the gala, the ones where I looked small and afraid. I replaced them with a photo of me and my team at the foundation, all of us wearing hard hats, smiling in front of a new project. "Everything beautiful starts with structure," I whispered, repeating my mother's favourite phrase. I went inside, closed the balcony doors, and sat down at my drafting table. There were new buildings to design, new lives to empower, and a future to build that was entirely my own. Ending hook. If you've ever been told you're nothing by the people who were supposed to love you, remember Elena Vance. They can take your money, they can take your home, but they can never take your foundation. If you enjoyed this story of justice and restoration, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of people who turned their ruins into empires. Tell me in the comments, What would you do if you found?